Great, so let's just get started now. Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar, Integrate for the Future. First, a little about me. My name is David Hallinan and I am an integration strategist here at Kloudless. Before we get started with this 30-minute presentation, a couple quick housekeeping items. We are in webinar mode, so you will be muted for the entire presentation. Please use the chat to alert us to any issues you might have. As a quick heads up, we'll be answering any questions at the end, so please feel free to ask anything you want during the webinar in the questions panel, and we will address as many as we have time for when we wrap up. Also, if we don't have time to get to every question, we will include any other follow-up questions and answers in our follow-up email as well. Great, so let's get started. So we really wanted to have our CEO, Elliot Sun, here for the webinar. Sadly, he got called away to Taipei for an interview with Alibaba. I did, however, have the opportunity to sit down with him and record a short 4-minute video on the roots of Kloudless and how it positioned us as leaders in the unified API space. So we're going to start off with a few minutes right off the bat to listen to his take on Kloudless's humble beginnings and how they led us to be a unified API company.
So what's really interesting is that if you just happen to Google Kloudless, you'll see two different start dates for Kloudless, one in 2012 and one in 2015. And that's because Kloudless started out as a Gmail plugin. And in 2012, one of the workflow issues that my co-founders and I were experiencing is that we spent a lot of time in our Gmail inboxes, but Gmail really didn't allow us to integrate out to any of the other cloud storage services that we were using, like Dropbox or Box. They really only tied in with their own homegrown cloud storage service, Google Drive. And this is a huge problem for us. So we built out this really neat Gmail plugin that embedded all these different cloud storage services right inside of your Gmail interface. We started with 3 of the largest ones, Box, Dropbox, and of course Google's own cloud storage service. We very quickly expanded beyond these 3. Our customers kept asking for more and more integrations. Many customers that we wanted wouldn't even use us if we didn't support the integrations that we wanted. So this number very quickly ballooned to the high teens and then the 20s. And we came to realize this huge pain in actually building and managing all these different integrations. So not only was the initial build pretty complicated because all these APIs were different, but they all changed over time as well, whether they were planned changes or unplanned changes. Things would eventually break and we'd have to go back and fix them. It was extremely frustrating for us. We felt like we weren't really a product company and we were just building and managing integrations full time. And it turned out that what we were experiencing was actually a trend that was widely seen across the industry. As businesses are adopting more and more applications, the complications around making these applications work very nicely together also became a huge deal. Businesses didn't want to purchase applications that didn't play nicely with the other applications that they had already invested in. So as every single business adopted more and more applications, the way to get them to actually play nicely together is to use their APIs and tie them together. So with more apps also came more APIs. And all of these are, again, very different, not just in their documentation, but how their features work. It might seem like they have the same features, but when it comes down to it, they work very differently. Some of them may have features that others don't have. The data they can extract is all different, and the formatting of that data and so forth. We actually ended up being so frustrated by this that we ended up selling off the Gmail plugin that we had, and we pivoted our platform into building something that would help developers handle this problem. So today, the Kloudless that was founded in 2015, we're really here to make it easy for developers and product teams that are building commercial software products to have all the integrations that they need to serve their customers. And the way that we do this, I'll let David get into in a lot more detail, and you'll be able to do that better than I probably can. But essentially what we really want to enable in the long run is an application network that's powered by integrations that work out of the box. So every single application that a business might adopt already plays very nicely out of the box with any other software they might be using.
Great. So many thanks to Elliot for his introduction. We're just going to jump right back into the webinar now. So for those of you that may have come in a little bit late, a bit about Kloudless at a high level. We provide unified APIs that allow product teams connecting with multiple cloud services for a particular use case, deploy their product 8 times faster, and decrease their overall API maintenance by a factor of 4. Essentially, these unified APIs are providing dev teams in many different industries the ability to reach market faster. We found that teams were spending thousands of hours building and then more importantly, maintaining these integrations to multiple services that would in turn take away from their time to focus on what's important, their own unique functionality. And we also help cut down Jira tickets by about 1,000,000%. That is not a real metric, by the way, but it is probably pretty close. So today, for the sake of helping you with your application's integration strategy, I will share our take on the future of enterprise connectivity, as well as show you how beneficial unified data models can be through the use of one of our UI tools. So let's talk about how unified APIs are solving the future of integrations for different code bases. And I believe that this starts with the end user. Users hate change. So let me actually walk that statement back a bit. Users hate being forced into change. Users are simply people, and when given the chance, they will go with what they feel comfortable with. We've all had moments in our lives where instead of the new and the mysterious, we side with something we feel at home with. We love our security blankets. We rewatch the entirety of TV shows that we love, despite new programming being more abundant than ever. We wear our favorite t-shirt even though it has holes in it. So obviously at points we branch out and consume new media and buy new clothes, but those decisions take concerted effort and they aren't nearly as quick and easy for us to decide on as just rewatching The Office for the 10th time or buying those pairs of New Balances that we know we like already. In that vein, forcing users into an integration that they may not already use, be it a cloud storage or a calendar provider, is the fastest way to turn away potential users. So to keep this as filled with analogies as possible, which is frankly my favorite way to present information, I feel like this could best be summed up with pizza. So bear with me. We all love pizza. At least I hope we all love pizza. And more than that, we all love our favorite pizza. So I might be able to back up why Chicago deep dish or New York thin crust or California farm-to-table flatbread is the best type of pizza. And these probably all have claims to actually being the best pizza for a litany of reasons. But at the end of the day, we all have our own opinions that drive our impulses, and you may very well look me in the eye and tell me your favorite pizza is something like this. So there's probably no quantifiable data to back up that Little Caesars is the best pizza in the world, but that doesn't really matter to someone who's hankering for a little pizza in their life. So if somebody's favorite pizza is their favorite cloud storage integration, then despite all your efforts to tell them why you might believe an alternative is a better choice, they very well may not care. They know what they like, and more importantly, they know what they're invested in. So let's say I'm building the next big collaborative app. This is Sync App, patent pending. My application needs to seamlessly allow the syncing of data between multiple cloud storage services in order to work. I'm just now starting out on my product roadmap, and the only thing that's clear at this point is I have to provide my future users with access to the cloud storage services that they are already ingrained in. So to abandon pizza entirely, which is frankly the saddest sentence I've ever spoken out loud, let's look at this through a new analogy. In my analogy, the application is essentially a mall. I know in order for a mall to attract consumers to the stores contained wherein, they need to provide food for them. Now, that's not to say that food is the most important thing in a mall. It absolutely is not. But it is integral to drawing and then keeping people inside to take advantage of the real point of a mall, which is spending money. So just like in order to attract users to my unique functionality contained inside my application, I need to provide integrations. They are not the most important part of my app, but my app still absolutely needs them to work. So when I'm going about building my application mall and I have to install an integration food court, I don't want users to come in and see this. Because even though many of my potential users may be ingrained in Dropbox, many of them will not be. A user that has all their files, documents, and potential workflows set up in Box or Google Drive or Ignite is likely to forego my application entirely in search of another that provides service integration they're comfortable and, more importantly, deeply invested in. Never underestimate a user's aversion to migrating their files and folders from one service provider to another. It is essentially the internet's version of moving houses. It is exhausting, and if you can afford to hire somebody to do it for you, by all means, go that route. Either that, or they'll be forced to go to a third party for their service integration of choice. So there are lots of automated workflow choices like a Zapier or a Workato, but if those are unembedded, and keyword here, unembedded, they can be very detrimental to my app for a multitude of reasons. First, users are forced to go somewhere else entirely to even use my product. That's something that I can count on weeding out at least a handful of prospective users due to apathy alone. Second, automated workflow services don't provide everything. So if my potential workflow isn't supported, a third-party iPaaS company now has to have their engineers build out that functionality. These automated workflow services provide wonderful functionality, but only to a limited extent. If they don't offer what I need, I'm essentially out of luck. So my application mall really needs users to show up and see something like this. Almost any user that sees value in my product will immediately see a service integration that they are already comfortable with. By doing this, I can already guarantee that some of my new users will more than likely take the time to at least give my application a fair shake. The problem with offering only one integration, or even a small few, is that some people will leave before I've had the chance to win them over. My application might work amazingly with only Dropbox integration, but some of my potential end users will be too stubborn to even give it a try. No one likes to sign up for a new service when it's not on their own terms. At the end of the day, I am not an evangelist for these storage platforms. So by choosing only one of them, I'm forcing myself into a role of advocating an entirely different platform than my own. I should worry about selling my own product, not one that integrates with mine. So just as a quick stopping point here, I wanted to send out a quick poll. Is anyone in the audience working on integrations at the moment or recently in the past? What was the greatest challenge your organization had when working on API integrations? We'll just take a quick few seconds to answer now. Okay, so just a few more seconds and then we'll look at this. Sweet, so thank you so much for sharing here. So it looks like maintenance actually made up the lion's share of answers here, which is something that we see very, very often here at Kloudless. And that's really one of the things that we try to take away from developers who are stuck in these API integrations. So in order to give you some more insight into why this is so important, and also why maintenance makes up a big part of the requests we see coming in, I'll highlight this with some real life examples we've come across. So one of our partners, SignNow, which is a cloud-based e-signature service, had run into some problems with their integrations. SignNow had been building connections with outside API services as one-offs, so writing code to connect to their specific service, testing connections, and ensuring that their integrations still worked after changes on the API side were made. So aside from the time needed to become familiar with the minute details of these connectors, a major problem persisted. Whenever an API would make changes to its responses or its endpoints, SignNow developers had to spend considerable time re-examining docs and refactoring code to accommodate that API's changes. They had been using automated workflows for some of their connections, But when a large number of their users requested Ignite, they were stuck at a point where they were weighing the feasibility of incorporating yet another storage integration into their app, knowing that would come with the headache of maintaining that new integration alongside all of the ones that were already implemented. So another real life example quickly was Blackboard, a company we worked with that creates educational products to equip teachers and administrators with tools to ensure that students have a safe, secure, and engaging place to learn. So the product team at Blackboard had inherited a bespoke integration for Dropbox and initially sought to build out the rest of the popular file storage services the same way, internally. They started with Microsoft OneDrive, which was a popular request at the time, and they soon ran into a number of issues. So as it turned out, the initial integration was not what required the bulk of their time and effort. It was the maintenance of the integration that proved to be a headache. Over 3 years of maintaining that bespoke integration, Blackboard's team created more than 600 Jira tickets and racked up approximately 8,800 hours towards OneDrive integration development and support alone. So Blackboard needed these storage API services to be able to sync with each other, which when you're integrating yourself leads to a new issue. How do they communicate? How do they swing on a swing set and gossip with each other, right? So point-to-point integrations are hard to implement. And even when you do go about putting in the time and effort to build them, they're prone to completely breaking when one of these two services changes their response data. This ends in every developer's favorite pastime, which is quickly scrambling to implement fixes. It's true that some developers are masochistic, but usually that's on projects that they actually want to do. But it's true, quickly fixing broken integrations leads to sloppy or incomplete work, and that's not an indictment on whoever fixes the problems. It's a reality of having users depend on a service suddenly going down and having to get it fixed quickly. The fact is, each of these services returns its own raw data. There is no global framework for the response data from a cloud storage API. So if your application requires these services to communicate with each other, you've now made your developers' lives exponentially harder. They are now responsible for formatting every response into an object parsable by the other. When we get to talking about more than 2 services, it's enough to make your head spin. So what these services really need is some sort of interpreter. Yay, sync app. So they need an intermediary to grab a response from one service and translate it into a request that the other can interpret. These services speak their own language in a sense, and they need to have a form of middleware to properly translate the comings and goings from each service. But unifying these data models is only one part of the way that a unified API eases those integration woes. Just as paramount in the scheme of helping to ease that burden is a unified endpoint. So a unified endpoints are a series of REST endpoints configured to access any and all categorical services through their unique ID. So this means that something like a simple post here can connect to all available storage services based on what a user has authenticated. If they've authenticated their Google Drive, then this points there. If they authenticate their Dropbox, then it points there. Your internal APIs require much fewer routes than would be necessary to build these integrations yourself. A unified endpoint means pretty much that for every supported service, we're still talking about a single route for a single CRUD action. So once a user authenticates a service, that account ID can be stored and used as a parameter in these endpoints. More than that, if a user authenticates 2 services, it's as simple as holding on to both account IDs and then slotting them in depending on which service is being accessed at the moment. Overall, building and maintaining integrations is rarely ever where a business wants to be innovating. It's not part of their core competencies. This image is not to show you that maintenance makes up a lion's share of your work, while innovation is only a slice. It's to show you that your work from the outside looking in looked like a nice sweet cake of productivity, when in reality it is a soggy and salty quiche of frustration. So with that, I'm going to launch real quickly into a short demo of our of our file explorer to show you a little bit more about how these unified endpoints and unified data models work. Great. So now we're going to go through a demo of the Kloudless File Explorer, which is essentially a free-to-use open-source JavaScript library that will allow your users to authenticate and then interact with all of their files and folders inside of their preferred cloud storage service. So again, this is something that we are using just to demo sort of how these unified data models and unified endpoints work. But this is Sync app. This is our hypothetical app that would be using to link users' cloud storage services together. So what we're using here is this. This is the File Explorer. This is our page. You can connect to dozens of different services with this to browse, upload, export data. And it is as easy as embedding a few lines of code from the GitHub library here. So if we go into the repository, we can see all you have to do is sign up for a free account at Kloudless to get a Kloudless app ID to initialize the File Explorer with. These are all of the services that users can authenticate and then interact with. And in order to use this, all we have to do is go down and embed a simple script tag. And then we're going to instantiate an Explorer object with an app ID. So that's really all we need to get started, and then users can start authenticating and then interacting with all of their files and folders inside of their preferred cloud storage service. So let's go and look at the code real quick. I don't want to put you in too much of a technical view here, but I have a very simple static front-end page. Very, very, very simple. What we're going to be doing is we have a table that's coming up on a modal that we're going to append the JSON responses to, just so we can see a visualization of what these responses look like after they've been modeled with our unified data models. So in order to do that, we've got our script tag here. And then down here, we're instantiating our Explorer object with an app ID. We have an event handler that is listening for a click on the button on the page, and then we have another one that is going to fire off on a successful grab of our JSON, and in the callback, our files will actually be our JSON response from whatever service we decide to connect with. So this down here is just a little logic to append those JSON responses to a table so we can visually see, and I don't have to bring up the inspector and show you a JSON blob there. So not really much going on, and in fact, you'll see that there's nothing here that's actually differentiating between different cloud storage services. This is just one sort of generic bit of JavaScript that's going to interact with any and all services that we support inside of the File Explorer. So let's go in and see how this looks. So inside of here, here's my button I have the listener on. When I click this, it's going to bring me to the pane view of the File Explorer that you can see. We can authenticate with any of these services here. So right off the bat, let's just go and authenticate Google Drive. So it's going to bring you into a standard OAuth flow right here. I'm going to authenticate with one of these accounts here. Just as a side note, this entire process can be white labeled so that your users have no idea of Kloudless's role in the process. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to allow. And cool, now we are authenticated with Google Drive, and it's going to bring me right to the root of my folder tree. So before we go and look at those, let's go and authenticate one more. Let's go authenticate Dropbox. And so I'll go through, as long as I'm in the correct account up here, I'm going to allow, go through the standard OAuth process for Dropbox. And now you can see I've authenticated two different accounts, Google Drive and Dropbox, with the same email. So this is actually going through each of these services through a single unified endpoint. So when I go to a read endpoint for both of these, all it's doing is it's grabbing my unique identifier and it's plugging it in for each of these services that I've now authenticated with. So let's go into Google Drive. I'm just going to grab an image here, this clouds PNG, and I'm going to press select, and it's going to give us the JSON on the screen. There we go. So nothing really out of the ordinary about this, right? We've got a lot of key values that seem pretty in line with a standard image file. So the API this belongs to is the Kloudless Storage API, the name of the file, unique identifier, couple of timestamps, a few key value pairs to show you where it is in the actual root tree and the hierarchy. And then a nice shortened link to the actual file itself. So really pretty standard JSON response. Nothing to really look at out of the ordinary here. But remember, this is coming from Google Drive. So let's close this up. Let's go back in, and now let's go grab one from Dropbox. And so if I go into Dropbox, I can see all I have is this image file here, so we'll grab this. So what this is going to do is it's going to append my Dropbox image file under my Google Drive one. So if you look, this is still the Google Drive, and we'll go down, and we'll see we have response object 2. So this is coming from Dropbox. And we've got API storage and name of the file. We've got the raw ID and the ID, some timestamps, ancestry, a link at the bottom. And what you'll notice here is that these are almost identical.
And that's the beauty of the unified data model. What this allows you to do is, as a developer, you may have never actually seen a response coming from Dropbox or Google Drive, but you already know what to expect when you're going to get your JSON response back. They are essentially identically modeled unified data models at this point. And so what this allows you to do is connect to as many services as you want without ever going through pages and pages of documentation to learn the response themselves. We know that since these are essentially competitors, they're not going to have the same response when they come back. Dropbox and Google Drive don't have some sort of universal data format to return data with. So in this case, what we've done is we've taken those unified data models and we've turn them into something where that any of the JSON responses from these cloud storage services get turned into something that is immediately recognizable for you. And so that's essentially a quick rundown of the File Explorer. And really the takeaway from this is that the unified data model is going to allow your developers to be able to know what's coming before they've ever even seen a real response, a raw response from one of these services. And it also means that in the back we can have much, much less routes, because both of these are just a read route that's going through a unified endpoint, and we're just plugging a unique ID for each of these services in. So that's the Kloudless File Explorer. All you need to do to get started is sign up for a free account, plug in an app ID, and you're ready to go.
Great, so that was just a quick demonstration of the File Explorer, just to show you more of a visual representation of how these models look identical, even though they come from different services. So we're just going to go back and finish up the slideshow, and then we'll have some time for some questions in a moment. To recap, with unified APIs, there's three major takeaways to immediately show the value to any code base in need of integrations. The first is depth of functionality. You can harness a depth of functionality that would normally require an incredible amount of time to implement yourself. By having the unified API be the go-between for your integrations means that your users can access any and all of these supported services in one fell swoop. Next up, and most obvious, is speed to market. So by integrating with a unified API, you can cut down on development and testing hours immensely, allowing your product to deploy faster. There are no sudden curveballs or outlier cases, because once you've built a connection to the unified API, all your integrations are essentially done. Unified endpoints means a single route can connect to any cloud storage service or calendar service or CRM service and so on. And finally, which is probably the most important in the long run, and also what the poll we sent out reflected, is that it's maintenance free. So with unified APIs, you can ensure the long-term stability of your product by offloading integration maintenance to them. They proactively adjust to cloud service API version updates so your connections stay sound. When one cloud service winds down a version of its API, unified APIs update to the new version so you don't have to. The benefit to this is you have the ability to leave your code as is without experiencing a pause in service or a lapse of functionality. This means you can maintain integrations with multiple cloud services at once without ever changing your code. Essentially, unified APIs allow developers to do what they're best at, which is innovate. There's few things that will break a developer's spirit like constantly having to fix API integrations. There's angry users on one side, confusing and incomplete documentation on the other, and a deadline of get it done right now because our app is broken. That's not conducive to quality work being done, and it doesn't encourage developers to be passionate about their job, which we absolutely want them to be. In the end, all of this is really just for your end user who hates change. If that user can seamlessly begin using your application without needing to sign up for a new service, you've already greatly diminished their chances of closing your app and forgetting about it. So there's over 10,000 publicly available APIs today. That number is only increasing, and until there is a universally accepted data format for categorical data, these issues will plague developers working on integrations. The future of enterprise IT management is not in providing connectivity. Integration work and management should not be the responsibility of internal teams. They should be offloaded to external cloud services, each with their own expertise to deliver plug-and-play integration with other providers. Out-of-the-box connectivity should be table stakes. But for now, unified APIs provide a simple and easier method to give your application this leg up on enticing and maintaining users, as well as keeping your developers focused on the most important pieces of functionality in your application, your own unique functionality. When all of these services play together well, it's a win-win situation, both for your application and developers and for your pizza-loving end user. So with that, we're actually a minute over time, but I wanted to take a couple minutes to do some questions. We have a few here. Again, if I don't get to all of them, we will address any and all questions in our follow-up email and send those out to you. So I'm just going to try to go through a few of these real quick. So yeah, here's a good one. So what about the data that gets left out of the unified data model? For instance, parameters that are unique to each cloud storage service. So that's a really, really good question. Obviously, these are all separate services, so their JSON responses will all be modeled differently. In some cases, that means that one service will offer some metadata that gets left out of the response from being sent through the unified data model. In cases where you need to retrieve data that isn't present in the unified data model, Kloudless will allow for the raw response to be retrieved. So in that sense, you can bypass the unified data model entirely if you need to retrieve data that might be offered in a specific service. Great, yeah, so let's see if we can get to one or two more. So when an API is updated, to what degree do my in-house developers need to update our code using Kloudless versus not? Oh, cool. Well, with Kloudless, not in the slightest. Because Kloudless is essentially a pass-through, your single connection to the unified APIs can stay the same forever. Whenever an API updates its versions or changes its response, Kloudless takes care of all the maintenance necessary to ensure your connection stays sound. So we really learned as a Gmail extension initially that maintenance took up a lion's share of our development time. So a huge part of what we offer is the ability to relieve developers of that burden. Every time we send out, like the poll we sent out today, every time we send out some sort of questionnaire or survey to API integration woes, maintenance is generally the top answer. So I'm not very surprised that we got that in our poll today. Kloudless does this in a handful of ways. We've worked with these services for a very long time, so we know them very well. We've forged some really good relationships with a few of these API companies, so we get heads up on when things are going to change. Oftentimes we have the changes implemented by the time they go live on the API side. So that's really a huge part of what we offer. Great, so we'll go 5 minutes over. I'll do one more. Is the file explorer included with the cloud storage integration, or is it a separate feature? Oh, yeah, so the file explorer is completely free and included in the unified cloud storage API. It is just an open source JavaScript library that we offer to have an embeddable sort of UI widget for applications to use. It is usable on a free account for up to 100 connected user accounts, I believe. So for testing purposes, you can go out and set up some test applications with it to see if it fits your organization's needs. It is also entirely configurable with editable style sheets to be able to match the look and feel of your app. It is not necessary, however. I just want to make sure we point that out. It is essentially a plug and play means to implement a UI tool into your application. But all of its features and functionality are offered through Kloudless's authenticator library and routes and unified APIs. So your application's API can implement any of its functionality without ever needing to use the file explorer. So I think, yeah, with 5 minutes over, we should probably stop here. If I didn't get to your question, we will absolutely address it in our follow-up email. As some housekeeping, yeah, so we'll have a follow-up. We'll send out all that to you soon. And thank you so much to everybody who attended today. We really appreciate you coming out. If you have any other questions you would like to send to us, please send an email to the email address on your screen, hello@kloudless.com. And we look forward to talking with you soon. All right, bye, have a good day.